The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sigh of finality, a sound that sliced through 8 years of desert grit and mountain echoes. Staff Sergeant Leo Vance stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of the station parking lot, the humid Ohio air clinging to him like a wet shroud. It was nothing like the dry, searing heat he had grown to accept as normal. This was the air of home. He shifted the weight of the heavy duffel on his shoulder, a familiar burden that felt alien here. The bag contained everything he had left in the world, a collection of uniforms, a few tattered paperbacks, and the crushing weight of a life lived a world away. A section. For 2 years, he had been a ghost. A prisoner of war, presumed killed in action, erased from the ledgers of the living. His release, the debriefings, the slow, disorienting journey back to the United States, it had all felt like a dream. Only this moment, the scent of rain on hot pavement and the distant drone of a lawnmower, felt real. This was the first step of the final leg of his journey. The surprise. A section. He had refused the military escort, the sterile delivery by a government car. He wanted to walk it. He needed to feel the ground of his own town under his boots, to see the familiar map of streets unfold before him not on a satellite image, but in brick and mortar, in the shade of maple trees he'd climbed as a boy. He wanted to walk up his own driveway and see the shock, the impossible joy, on Sarah's face. He wanted to see Maya and Noah, who had been 4 and 2 when he left. They would be 12 and 10 now. The thought was a fist clenching in his chest, a knot of terror and fierce, desperate love. A section. The walk was a pilgrimage through a past he had kept hermetically sealed in his mind. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses still spilled over the white picket fence on Elm Street. The crack in the sidewalk in front of the old library, the one he'd tripped over in the 8th grade, was still there, a dark, jagged smile in the concrete. Everything was the same. A perfect, preserved time capsule he was about to step back into. It affirmed his belief, the one that had kept him sane through the beatings and the starvation, home was waiting. Unchanged. A section. He turned onto his street, Oak Lane. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden quiet. He saw it then. His house. The blue shutters he'd painted the summer before he deployed. The tire swing hanging from the thickest branch of the ancient oak in the front yard. It was all exactly as he remembered. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. A section. But then the anomalies began to register, small details that his training, honed to spot the slightest inconsistency in a landscape, could not ignore. The lawn was too perfect, edged with a precision he had never possessed. A late-model sedan, a silver one he did not recognize, sat in the driveway where his old pickup truck should have been. And there was laughter. Not just the sound of his children, but a deep, male voice he did not know. He slowed his pace, his boots suddenly silent on the grass verge. The soldier in him took over, overriding the husband and the father. He moved to the side of the house, using the large rhododendron bush as cover, his body instinctively seeking concealment. His duffel bag slid silently to the ground. He was no longer on a joyful homecoming, he was on reconnaissance. The mission parameters had changed. A section. He crept to the large bay window that looked into the living room. The curtains were open. The scene inside was a diorama of domestic bliss, a perfect picture from a magazine, and it was the most horrific thing he had ever seen. Sarah was there. His Sarah. Her hair was shorter, styled differently, but it was her. She was laughing, her head tilted back in that way she did when she was truly happy. She was looking at a man. A man with sandy brown hair and a kind face, who was sitting on the floor, helping their son, Noah, assemble a complicated Lego creation. Their daughter, Maya, his little girl, sat on the sofa, reading a book, a small, contented smile on her face. Leo's blood ran cold. It felt like the air being sucked out of a fuselage at high altitude. His lungs burned. This wasn't a visitor. This wasn't a friend helping out. The easy intimacy, the comfortable silence, the way the man's hand rested for a moment on Sarah's knee, it was a language Leo knew fluently. Then came the kill shot. Noah, his son, held up the finished Lego starship. "Look, Dad," he said, his voice bright and proud. "We did it." The man smiled, ruffling Noah's hair. "Good job, buddy. You did most of the work." Dad." The word was not a sound. It was a physical impact, a high-velocity round that tore through Leo's chest, shredding everything inside. It struck him with more force than any enemy bullet ever had. He stumbled back from the window, his hand clamped over his mouth to stifle a cry that was clawing its way up his throat. He fell back against the rough brick of the house, his entire world, the one he had carried inside him for 8 years, collapsing into dust and ruin. The man he was trained to be fought for control. Assess the situation. Gather intelligence. Do not act on emotion. But the man he was, the husband and father, was dying all over again, right here on his own lawn. He grabbed his duffel bag, the weight of it now an anchor pulling him down into an abyss. He couldn't storm in. He couldn't scream. He was a ghost, and he had just walked in on the lives of those who had buried him. He retreated, moving silently back down the street, his legs numb, his mind a white-hot static. He walked without direction, the familiar neighborhood now a hostile, alien territory. He ended up at the one place in town that promised quiet sanctuary. The old stone church. He didn't go inside. He went around back, to the small cemetery, and that's where he found the second piece of the wreckage. It was a simple granite headstone, tucked beneath a weeping willow. It was new enough that the edges were still sharp. The grass around it was neatly trimmed. Leo knelt before it, his fingers tracing the impossible letters carved into the stone. Staff Sergeant Leo Vance. Beloved husband and father. Missing in action. Declared dead. The dates confirmed a funeral 2 years after his capture. 2 years. They had waited 2 years. The anger he expected to feel didn't come. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. He was not just replaced. He was erased. Mourned, buried, and moved on from. He looked at his own grave, and for the first time since he'd been freed, he felt truly, utterly lost. He spent that night in a cheap motel on the highway, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale smoke baked into the curtains. He sat on the edge of the bed, the television playing silently, casting shifting blue shadows on the wall. He did not sleep. He ran threat assessments, tactical scenarios, but the enemy wasn't a man in his house or a government that had made a mistake. The enemy was time. The enemy was the human heart's desperate need to heal, to survive. How could he fight that? The next day, he made a call. Not to Sarah. Not yet. He called Mr. Henderson, the old man with the roses, a retired Marine colonel who had known Leo his whole life. They met on a park bench overlooking the river, the same one where Leo had asked Sarah to marry him. Mr. Henderson looked at him as if he were seeing an apparition, his old eyes wide with shock, then filling with a deep, knowing sadness. "Leo," he said, his voice raspy. "My God, son. We thought you were gone." Leo's voice was a dead thing. They held a funeral, it wasn't a question. The old man nodded slowly. They did. The whole town came. "Sarah, son, I've never seen a woman break like that. For 2 years, she was a wraith. She wouldn't believe it. Kept the lights on for you every night. Kept your truck just as you left it. But the kids, the kids were struggling. Maya was having nightmares. Noah stopped talking for 6 months. Leo stared at the slow-moving water, the words hitting him like methodical blows. This wasn't a story of betrayal. It was a story of survival. She fought, Leo, Mr. Henderson continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. She fought to keep you alive for them, for herself. But the official letter came. The ceremony at the base. They gave her a flag. What was she supposed to do? Let your children drown in her grief forever? He paused, letting the weight of the question settle. Michael, the man you saw, he's a good man. A widower himself. A guidance counselor at the middle school. He met Sarah at a grief support group. He didn't replace you, Leo. He helped patch the gaping hole you left behind. He was patient with the kids. He helped Sarah learn to live again. Each word was a piece of the puzzle, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He had imagined his absence as a pause button on their lives. He had never considered that it was a wound that would have to scar over, that new skin would have to grow. His return was not a healing balm, it was the act of ripping that scar wide open. What do I do, sir? Leo asked, the question raw and childlike. Mr. Henderson put a heavy, wrinkled hand on his shoulder. The soldier in you wants to take back his ground. The man in you has to decide what's best for them. Not what was. What is. Right now. That evening, he called her. When Sarah heard his voice, there was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked, disbelieving sob. It was a sound of pure shock, not joy. It was the sound of a ghost calling. They met at a small, empty diner halfway between his motel and his house. She looked fragile, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a coffee cup. The terror in her eyes was the hardest thing to witness. She wasn't looking at the husband she'd lost, she was looking at a specter who had come to shatter the fragile peace she had spent years building. Leo, she whispered, his name a prayer and a curse. How? It's a long story, he said, his own voice tight with emotions he couldn't name. They found the camp. There were 2 of us left. Tears streamed down her face, silent and constant. They told me you were dead. They showed me evidence. Photos. A report. They said there was no hope. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. The official letter from the Department of Defense. It was cold, formal, and absolute. I waited, Leo, she said, her voice cracking. I swear to you, I waited. I watched the door every single day. But the kids. Maya wouldn't sleep. Noah, he needed a father. He needed someone present. Michael, he's kind. He helped us heal. I saw, Leo said, the words tasting like ash. I saw him with Noah. Sarah flinched, a new wave of pain washing over her face. What do you want me to do, Leo? What can I possibly do? My life, our children's lives, are built on the fact that you were gone. What you're asking is for me to tear it all down. For them. For him. For me. And there it was. The moral crossroads. The choice. His training had given him a clear objective: secure the target, reclaim what was his. His heart, the one he thought had hardened into stone, screamed for him to fight for her, for the life he was owed, the years that were stolen. But looking at her, at the raw agony in her eyes, he saw the truth. He could be a wrecking ball. He could storm back into their lives, armed with the righteousness of his survival, the legitimacy of their marriage vows. He could create a battlefield in his own living room, forcing his children to choose, forcing Sarah to break all over again. He could win that war. And in winning, he would destroy them all. He thought of his role as a soldier. It was to protect. To shield others from harm. For 8 years, he had done that for his country. Now, his mission had changed. The greatest threat to his family's peace and stability was him. His duty was no longer to reclaim his position, but to protect the life they had managed to build in the crater of his absence. He took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel like it was filled with glass. He reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently laid it over hers. She flinched, then stilled. You don't have to do anything, Sarah, he said, his voice quiet, steady. You survived. You did what you had to do for our kids. That's all a soldier can ask of the people they leave behind. To survive. He saw a flicker of disbelief in her eyes, then a dawning, heartbreaking wave of gratitude. This was his action. His choice. Not a battle, but a surrender. A strategic withdrawal to secure the well-being of the civilians. I'm not going to destroy your life, he continued. But they are my children. I need to be in their lives. Somehow. I don't know what that looks like. But I won't be a ghost, and I won't be a grenade. We'll have to figure out what comes next. Together. The climax was not a shouting match but a quiet, solemn pact. The following week, he met Michael. The man was nervous, respectful, and clearly loved Sarah and the kids. He shook Leo's hand, his eyes full of a complicated sorrow. There was no animosity. There couldn't be. They were two men bound by their love for the same family, their lives impossibly tangled by fate and war. 3 months later, the new normal had begun to take shape. Leo rented a small apartment a few miles away. He got a job at a local hardware store, the simple, physical work a balm for his restless mind. He started therapy at the VA, unpacking the horrors of the last 8 years. His relationship with his children was a slow, delicate reconstruction. He was not Dad. He was Leo. At first, it was supervised visits in a park. Awkward conversations. He was a stranger with their mother's eyes. But he was patient. He told them stories, not of the war, but of when they were little. He remembered Maya's favorite bedtime story, and the silly song he used to sing to Noah. Slowly, tentatively, they began to build a new bridge across the chasm of lost years. He taught Noah how to throw a baseball. He helped Maya with a history project, his own lived experience a resource she found fascinating. He was becoming a part of their lives, a new and permanent fixture. Different from a father, but more than an uncle. Something new, for which they had no name yet. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was at the park, watching Noah play in a Little League game. Michael was coaching first base. Sarah was in the stands a few rows ahead of him. She turned, caught his eye, and gave him a small, genuine smile. It was not the smile of a lover, but of a partner. A co-conspirator in the strange, difficult, and beautiful task of raising their children. Leo looked out at the field. He saw his son, safe and happy. He saw the man who was raising him, a good and decent man. He saw the woman he would always love, whole and healing. His mission was complete. He hadn't come home to the life he had left. He had come home to find a new one. His purpose was no longer to be the husband who had left, but to be the protector who had returned, guarding a peace that had been built on top of his own grave. And in that quiet acceptance, he finally, truly, felt like he was home.